start backing up a little bit, a few verses before that, at the end of chapter 14. But pretty much, as you can see on this first slide, we're going to be talking mainly from 2 Kings 15. That's going to be going over the vast changes of kings from the northern kingdom, from Jeroboam II, his death, all the way through Pekah. As usual, being the northern kingdom, that's going to be talking about a lot of evil and idolatry going on up there. Be a lot of assassinations talked about in this lesson. I believe there's at least 3 of those. We'll talk a little bit about Tiglath-Pileser. Not sure if we talked about him much in this yet. We might have introduced him a little bit, but I have a slide to talk about his campaign and the way he's used to carry about the God's plan of punishing Israel for their sin. And, we've spent a lot of time talking in the prophets already from Jonah, really, and dealing with Assyria, but then specifically with Amos and Hosea and God's warnings that these consequences were imminent now. But we saw at the time how prosperous that the northern kingdom was, but you're going to see that prosperity start to wane right now, and the evil that has been done, those consequences are really going to start showing up in the lesson and with the turmoil and all of that going on during this lesson. God was really wanting repentance, and we keep bringing up, as we always have, this remnant because of God's love and mercy, that there will be a remnant for those that even though there's going to be consequences on the nation, those that truly seek after God and still want to seek after God and listen to this warning that's being given, there will, be a chance for salvation for those. But as far as the consequences on the nation, there's really no turning back at this time. We'll discuss a little bit in the southern kingdom with Uzziah and talking about his pride and then death at the end of that. And then we're going to just talk a little bit about Isaiah, just introducing him by going through Isaiah chapter 6. And then Johnny will, has the challenge of covering, I guess, the half or a little more than half the book this Wednesday night. And then the second half of the book of Isaiah will be a week from today. And Rob Cook will be covering me on that lesson. But that's pretty much your next week after today will be the book of Isaiah over the next week. So let's talk a little bit about just what's going on, and this will introduce what I'm going to get to in the next few slides right here. But if you notice the numbers beside the names at the bottom left, we're going to get to this prophecy of Jehu, the fulfillment of this prophecy given concerning Jehu and his 4 descendants, which would be Jehoahaz, Jehoash, Jeroboam II, who we've been studying so far this quarter quite a bit, and then his son Zechariah. So just kind of calling out, reminding you of that right there. And as you guys all had the advantage of studying this last quarter, had to go back and do a lot of reminders on those very famous stories that kind of led to all this right here. But we'll be talking a little bit about Ahab and what Jehu had to do with Ahab and his family, and then talking about this fulfillment of this prophecy during those kings. But pretty much for today's class, other than that prophecy there, the kings that we'll be discussing and their stories will be pretty much Jeroboam II dying, and then Zechariah, Shallum, Menahem, Pekahiah, and Pekah. All that's going on in this one lesson, all these changes in the kingdom, and we'll talk about that. So you see this list is getting short. Now, that's not a complete list of Judah on the side. It kind of just gets us where we are today. But on the left, that's pretty much going to be the kings that are left when they're taken captive by the Assyrians. So that's just a little visual aid to let you guys think back about what you just studied last quarter concerning Jehu and that prophecy. Okay, so let's talk about the death of Jeroboam. He's been, we've been saying all along on these charts going all the way back from the lessons we've been doing this quarter that the king in the northern kingdom was Jeroboam II. We've been talking about the king in the south was Uzziah. So this class kind of ends those kingdoms today that we're talking about. We move forward through other ones, but through all these prophets and everything we've been studying so far, we've been talking about those, but this is going to be the lesson that kind of deals with the end of us talking about Jeroboam the second. So 2 Kings 14, 26 through 29 kind of wrap everything up on Jeroboam the second. We probably have read this a few times, so let's just jump down to, we talked about his expansion of the northern kingdom and how he really extended the borders and the prosperity. But looking at verse 28, now the rest of the acts of Jeroboam and all that he did, his might, how he made war, how he recaptured for Israel from Damascus and Hamath what had belonged to Judah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Jeroboam rested with his fathers, the kings of Israel. Then Zechariah his son reigned in his place. So it is interesting, if you back up a little bit, the usage of words that how God used, and this isn't the only time, we'll get to some more of these later, but God uses evil people sometimes to bring about his will. For example, we'll talk about Tiglath-Pileser in a little bit. I mean, that's not some, super righteous guy that's doing what God and serving what God wants, but he's being used as an instrument of God to bring out the punishment of Israel. Well, Jeroboam, we've talked about the great prosperity of the northern kingdom, while morally they were impoverished, right? That's really the story of him. But he was, as far as just in a political nature, he was a very good or strong king, let's put it that way. But we know very much that he was very evil. The idolatry never stopped. The people were morally corrupt. But the language used that that God had saved Israel from bitter affliction by his hand, by the hand of Jeroboam the second. So that's just a few verses before what we just read. So he was used by God to bring about God's will, even though there's no doubt this man is morally corrupt, and he had led the people into moral corruption as well. Again, he was one of the most successful kings. We talked about the territorial expansion and the great wealth. I want you to keep this in the back of your minds. Remember how we had discussed in the prophets that the ladies were called cows of Bashan, and how they were sitting there asking their husbands for drink, and it kind of gives a picture of them laying on the couches. And you remember that descriptive language where it talked about them like wanting the very dust off the head of the poor. They weren't just selfish people. They were so selfish, they're described as wanting the very dirt off the heads of the poor. They wanted to strip them of everything they had, so just a very terrible state that the kingdom of Israel was in at this time. And just going to bring up this point, I don't want to get into a lot of years for this short discussion today. And if you study the Waldron book, or as most of you in this room have studied the series of Kings for a long time, there seems to be like a 22-year gap from Jeroboam the second, from his reign until the reign of his son Zechariah. And as most of you already know in here, there was a lot of, you can pull up slides on this, but there was a lot of co-regent power going on in Israel and other nations sometimes too. But, sometimes it had to do with the age of the child, and they might have been, too young to be able to do that. And so they have to do that. But sometimes the issue is force with them being called a king. In the case of Uzziah that we're going to get to in a moment, he can't really do his job the way that he could before. And so there has to be, a certain period of time to bring the other person up to where they actually could rule. But anyway, just bringing that note up, I'm not going to really do much more about that. So sticking with Israel right now, Jeroboam the second, he dies. And then now we're getting into chapter 15. So let's read a little bit on these kingdoms. And again, this is just really in one chapter today, and there's just vast changes going on in here. I guess you would say turnover and a lot of turmoil between the kings. So let's read 15, 8 through 12. In the 38th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam, reigned over Israel and Samaria 6 months. So not a very long reign. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, as his fathers had done. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the sons of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. Then Shallum, the son of Jabesh, conspired against him and struck and killed him in front of the people, and he reigned in his place. Now, the rest of the acts of Zechariah, are they not written in the Chronicles of the Kings? And then going to verse 12, you get to what we wanted to talk about just a moment, or mention just a moment ago. I'm going to hold off on that, but you get into this, when Zechariah comes into power here, you get into this prophecy of Jehu. So let's look at what we have here. So he's the son of Jeroboam II, who we've been studying the whole quarter. You know, there's no change. If you've studied the Old Testament very much, you pretty much know all the kings. They never get rid of the idolatry. They got problems from every facet of character you can think about. But one thing, if they ever did anything right at all, one thing they never got rid of through all these kings is the idolatry of the original Jeroboam the first, son of Nebat. So that never changed, and so they're never in good standing with God because of those sins. So let's get into this prophecy. So again, you all had the advantage of studying the last quarter about what Jehu did. So can somebody kind of summarize what did Jehu do that led to these 4 descendants on the throne? What did he do that God said you can have 4 sons sitting on the throne? Can somebody kind of summarize what did he really do? That may seem kind of violent or whatever, but what did he do back that you discussed in the last quarter? What did he do that God was pleased with? Jehu, anybody? Right. Yeah, so if you go back, so let's jump in a few chapters back and everything, but you know how evil Ahab and Jezebel were, and God had had enough of them and wanted them wiped out, and so pretty much that's what God wanted done, and Jehu took care of business. He goes in and he wipes out, if you go back and study that, he wipes out I believe it was the 70 sons of Ahab, and then he wipes out 42 brothers of Ahaziah, and then he knocks out more of Ahab's descendants, and it goes through all that back to back. And then what did he do with the not only, I guess, the priests? What did he do with the followers of Baal in the northern kingdom? Do you remember? Anybody remember that? Kind of the same story, the same chapter. So what did he do with Baal worship, Jehu, up in the northern kingdom? Yeah, so he wipes them out. You remember, he kind of gathers them all into their place of worship, and he kind of deceitfully tells them that he's all about Baal too. You remember that? So he calls them in and gets them all in there, and he makes sure that there's no men of God, the true God, that are in there. And when he gets them all there, he pretty much burns it to the ground and anything associated with that. So God was very pleased with that. Was Jehu some great righteous man? No. But again, God uses him in this manner, and he wipes out Baal worship. So that led to this point right here in this bullet that says Zechariah is the 4th and last descendant of Jehu to sit on the throne. So if we flip back just a couple of chapters to 2 Kings 10 and verse 30, it says, "And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in doing what is right in my sight, and have done to the house of Ahab all that was in my heart, your son shall sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation." So that's what's happening here. That doesn't mean Jehu was this super righteous guy, but he did what the will of God was here. That doesn't mean that these 4 sons of Jehu were righteous men. They weren't. They never got rid of the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. So that's just bringing this up, and that leads to God keeping his promises, and God using the way God is, and sometimes he uses evil people to bring about what his will is. He's not happy with the evil that they're doing. There is no pat on the back for them in those ways, but in this case right here, he was doing exactly what God wanted him to do. So there's a fulfillment of a prophecy that was made years before, where God's keeping his promises here. And as you're going to see several times on the slides that we're talking about today, what happens to him? We already said he only ruled 6 months. He was assassinated by, I guess we say, the next guy. And this happened several times. So, Jeroboam II ruled a long time. We're going to see in the southern kingdom, Uzziah ruled a long time. But as far as the northern kingdom right here, you're pretty much not making it very long. There was a lot of turnover and turmoil at this time. They're already full of sin. The consequences are coming with them. And God's allowing, you may have a better word than this, but anarchy to kind of rule amongst them. He's allowing their evil deeds to really start to end their destruction. As we've been studying in Amos and Hosea, he's going to bring about that destruction, and part of that is having political turmoil at this time that he's allowing. So that's what happens. It's only a 6-month rule of Zechariah, and that's his end. So then we get into the guy that killed him to take over the kingdom, that leads this conspiracy. 2 Kings 15, 13 through 15. Let's read that real quick. Shallum, the son of Jabesh, became king in the 39th year of Uzziah. So it's still about 13 years in Uzziah's reign. And he reigned a full month. There's some humor in that to me, but maybe it's not meant as humorous. But I mean, a full month is just like, you have 52-year reigns and stuff, and he reigned a full month, So it's kind of strange language used right there, but that's his deal. He took the kingdom by force for whatever reason. I'm sure God's behind a lot of this going on, but he goes in and he kills Zechariah, which is bringing about this prophecy given to Jehu in that kingdom. But, he had no right really to be king either. And so he only rules a month. And he's the one we just talked about that assassinated Zechariah. Well, now he gets assassinated by the next guy. After that 1 full month rule, he's assassinated by Menahem. So now let's get to Menahem real quick. So that's the next one. So you see, now we're changing kings like crazy right here in the northern kingdom. And you're going to start seeing some of the repercussions of what God said during his reign. So in 2 Kings 15, pretty much 14 through 18, skipping verse 15, it says about him, for Menahem, the son of Gadi, went up from Tirzah, came to Samaria, and struck Shallum, the son of Jabesh, in Samaria, and killed him, and he reigned in his place. And then jumping down to verse 16, then from Tirzah, Menahem attacked Tifsah, all who were there, and its territory, because they did not surrender. Therefore he attacked it. All the women there who were with child, he ripped open. And then it goes on to say in the next verse, in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah, or Azariah, Menahem, the son of Gadi, became king and reigned 10 years in Samaria. And he did evil, and it goes into talking about the sins of Jeroboam again. So a little bit about him. So we've had some quick changes now, 6 months, 1 month. They've just changed 3 rulers in about, 7 months, less than a year. And they've gone from Jeroboam to Zechariah to Shallum and now Menahem in this very short period of time. So you got absolute turmoil going on up there. So he assassinated Shallum to get the king. And then it talks a little bit, so his character, not only is he somebody that didn't take away idolatry, his character is so evil. They're ripping open pregnant women in there because the people wouldn't submit to his rule or wouldn't follow when he had taken over the kingdom via attacking. And, in a bad, just taking over the king, he had no following. And he's like, you're going to follow me or else. And he goes in there and he takes out this city and killing people. And he's just a brutal ruler. But he was able to make it 10 years in there. So a little bit longer rule than the previous 2 fellas. But, the sins never go away, right? These same ones in Israel, we all know that. They never go away. So think about what was the life in Israel like now. You go back, at least prosperity-wise, and we talked about Jeroboam II and expanding of the borders, and just looks like just immense wealth going on in the northern kingdom. The people were really very prosperous financially, even though they were morally corrupt. But now we're going to start seeing that even those blessings that they had through all these opportunities God had, they're going to blow it, and those consequences are coming. So you got battles for power, assassination, sin, loss of wealth. The consequences of sin are being felt. So let's look at how some of these consequences are coming in to move here. If you reference back at in 1 Chronicles 5:26, there was a discussion, a historical discussion of Tiglath-Pileser back there. It's just one verse there, but he's eventually going to take Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh on the east side. And let's read real quick 2 Kings 15 and 19 and 20, because it'll talk a little bit relating Menaham's rule to Tiglath-Pileser. And so verses 19 and 20, Pul, who's Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, that his hand might be with him to strengthen the kingdom under his control. And Menahem exacted the money from Israel, from all the very wealthy, from every man 50 shekels of silver, to give the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria turned back and did not stay there in this land. So already at this time, really, the power of Israel has been taken away. Once you're given this vast wealth to somebody else, it's because you know you can't defeat them. And they're kind of tapping out, and they're like, let us pay you to leave us alone right now. He's already going to take all this land and stuff. And if it's not here, it comes up in a moment. But he also, Tiglath-Pileser comes in, and he's going to take cities and all this other land and stuff. But Menahem is forced to pay tribute of 1,000 talents of silver, which I believe I got this from the Waldron book, that's about 37 tons of silver to get pulled up to back off. And that's about 1.25 pound from every wealthy man, which looks like there was about 60,000 men if you exacted that much from each one. That's some of the math Mr. Waldron did back in the day. But the deal is, remember we talked about how wealthy they were. Well, here starts pulling away from it. They were already morally corrupt, but they were living the high life. Now, as God sends Assyria in to start slapping them around for their disobedience, you start seeing their wealth dissipate as well. So that's what I wanted to really make sure that point was coming in here, that this Assyrian invasion that starts happening is starting to chip away at the land. It's starting to chip away at the wealth. It's starting to cause turmoil amongst the leadership there. And so you're really starting to have a story that's very chaotic going on in the northern kingdom here. So just remember these lessons from Amos and Hosea that were predicting all of this, and now here we are, and it's starting to happen. It's starting to happen very quickly. So we're getting closer and closer to them being totally wiped out, which God described as we were going through the prophets. All right, any questions or comments through so far? Okay. Let's go to the southern kingdom for a little bit, and let's talk about Uzziah. So let's see how I have for time here. This is over in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, only a few verses there. Not sure if we introduced this a few weeks back or not, but let's talk about this because this is the end again. And we kind of been talking about the same two kings through everything this quarter so far, but now we had a lot of changes going on in the northern kingdom, but we also have a change going to happen in the southern kingdom. This 52-year rule is going to come to an end down here as well. So 2 Chronicles 26, verses 16 through 23. Says in verse 16, but when he was strong in his heart, we're talking about Uzziah here, he was lifted up to his destruction, for he transgressed against the Lord by entering the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. So Azariah the priest went in after him, and with him were 80 priests of the Lord, valiant men. And they withstood King Uzziah and said to him, it is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have trespassed. You shall have no honor from the Lord God. Then Uzziah became furious, and he had a censer in his hand to burn incense. And while he was angry with the priests, leprosy broke out on his forehead before the priest in the house of the Lord, beside the incense altar. And Azariah, the chief priest, And all the priests looked at him, and there on his forehead he was leprous. So they thrust him out of that place. Indeed, he also hurried to get out because the Lord had struck him. King Uzziah was a leper until the day of his death. He dwelt in an isolated house because he was a leper, for he was cut off from the house of the Lord. Then Jotham, his son, was over the king's house and judging the people of the land. So here's this co-regency again we're talking about here, where you have the true king or whatever, but now he's been smitten by God and can't really be out amongst the people and stuff. So his son, who's probably pretty young at this time, is a co-regent. And they probably got counselors and everything else kind of running the show because Uzziah is a leper. Verse 22, now the rest of the acts of Uzziah, from the first to the last, the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, wrote. So Uzziah rested with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the field of burial, which belonged to the kings, for they said, he is a leper. Then Jotham, his son, reigned in his place. And we won't get much into Jotham right now. We'll be talking about him in about a week or so. But let's look at some of this right here. And I think there's a lot of lessons, and maybe you can come up with some of your own, especially in today's side. I want you to think in the back of your mind, you may not be going into the house of the Lord with a censer in your hand to burn incense, but our correlation, I think we can see that there's people that decide to worship God in the way that they want to worship, right? They want to do it in this way. God instructed this way, and they're like, this other way has more feeling to me. It's more emotional or whatever, or I know it says this, but I'm going to do this sort of thing. So kind of be thinking about that. There's really a lot of lessons I think that we can get from that, even though nobody would probably be, recreating the circumstance that happens here, but his mindset, we ought to be able to see correlation to us. So you got Uzziah's pride, and it's going to lead him to destruction. Pride comes before the fall. Well, that's what happens with him right here. Again, we've been talking about the expansion of the northern kingdom. We've been talking about the expansion of the southern kingdom and how the borders were pushed out. There was a lot of prosperity going around in this time period leading up to this. And I think a lot of that caused some arrogance and stuff with Uzziah for whatever reason, where he thought, why do I need these people to do this? I'm going to go interface with God directly. And it wasn't his job, right? And we know from studying everything all the way back from the Exodus and, Numbers and Deuteronomy, Leviticus, all of those deep studies that we had last year, that he had no right. That was right off the bat. He had no right to go in there and do what he was supposed to do. So you have his pride, then you have his actual sin of actually what he was trying to do, doing what was the role of the sons of Aaron, the priest. He had no right, and you can see number 16 for that. And so the chief priest Azariah and the other priests, they call him out, and it just had to be it's a scary thing, because you're having to get on to the leader, and there may be some fear of you being killed for standing up to the king, but the true king is God, and they get that, at least here in the temple here, and they get, this can't be done, and they're shocked, and they're immediately having this reaction to it, that they got to drive him out of there, because God may wipe them all out for that, and they understand that. So they stand up against Uzziah, talks about his fury that he has, and he gets all angry, and he's like, how dare you, pretty much in his mindset, I'm the king. So God strikes him, which, whether he was furious or not, God brings him down quickly, striking him with leprosy. It's part of their job to call out who's unclean and see who's unclean and that, and they inspect him very quickly, and they drive him out of the temple. But they didn't have to work as hard now, because once he was struck with leprosy, he's fleeing as well now. So he's driven out, and then this is where Jotham's going to rule in his place. It's a sad story. It's somebody that's down here that has been very prosperous and done a lot of good things down here in the southern kingdom, that the pride overtakes them and the arrogance takes over, and it's like, I'm above everybody else, and at this time I'm above God's rules, right? Those rules don't apply to me, because I'm El Capitano. I'm top of the heap. No, I don't have to answer to anybody, and God puts him in his place very quickly. And so just notice at the end of that reading there, because he's an unclean person, a leper, he can't be buried in the sepulchres of the king. So he's buried close to it in the fields, whatever. And I believe the Waldron book talked about him being the third the third king that wasn't buried in the sepulchres of the kings. But you notice it used that language that he was buried in that field because he is a leper. So that's what they had to follow right there. With him being unclean, his body had to be buried somewhere else, albeit close. He wasn't given the honor of being buried with the other kings. So a lot of things happen here. Does anybody got a lesson that's on the top of their mind, or what makes you think how it may be applied to us? Because that's probably the most important thing that we can get out of this right here is looking back and saying, what does this mean to me, or what can I garner from studying this Old Testament? Do you think we hit everything? Go ahead.
Same time, as you mentioned, priests had an obligation to stand up to God. And whatever else their motivation, they saw what was right. They hadn't. They might have. But it's the same principle. Both the king and the priest both knew what was right. The priest chose to.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments. So for those that may be listening that's not here, Mr. Piconia was just bringing up a point from James 4, kind of wrapping all this up and summarizing to not do right when we know to do right. God's not going to be okay with that right there. So you have a case right here that even when we have to stand up, when it may be stressful, that's what we have to do. We got to do what God wants us to do, and we have to be bold when we have to be bold. We can't let sin happen and just walk away from it. Anybody else? Okay, let's get back to the northern kingdom. So now we're getting to Pekahiah back in Israel. So this is 2 Kings 15, 22. So flipping back over to chapter 15. Let's start at verse 23 here. In the 50th year of Azariah, or Uzziah, king of Judah, Pekahiah the son of Menahem became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 2 years, another short reign. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, repeating the sons of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, there in verse 24. And then verse 25, then Pekah, the son of Remaliah, an officer of his, conspired against him and killed him in Samaria in the citadel of the king's house, along with Argob and Arich. With him were 50 men of Gilead. He killed him and reigned in his place. Now the rest of the acts, they'll be in the book of the Kings of the Chronicles there, as it says in verse 26. So turmoil again. 50th year of Uzziah, his reign's coming to an end. He's in isolation. You got a co-regency going on in the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom, you got Menahem's son. The normal flow of the way that the kingdom is supposed to go from father to son happens this time, but we've had great turmoil already. Menahem's son here, Pekahiah, reigns for 2 years. As usual, continues in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. That idolatry never leaves the northern kingdom. He's assassinated with 2 of his officials by Pekah, who's going to be the next king. He's killed in the citadel of the king's house. And it's talking about this conspiracy included 50 men of Gilead. So Pekah killed him, so now you got a new king that took the throne by force. So now we're getting to this a man named Pekah. 2 Kings 15, 24, and also 27 through 21. Verse 24, I don't need to reread that. We already read 24. 27 through 31, in the 52nd year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, became king over Israel and reigned 20 years. And he did evil in the days of Pekah, king of Israel. So this is important. Here's those consequences really pressing on the northern kingdom now. Verse 29, in the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ajon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Genoa, Kadesh, Hazor, Gilead, and Galilee, and all the land of Naphtali, and he carried them captive to Assyria. Then Hoshea the son of Elah, led a conspiracy against Pekah the son of Remaliah, and struck and killed him, and reigned in his place in the 20th year of Jotham, son of Uzziah. Again, we won't get into anything about Jotham yet, but you kind of see it. You see all this going on? I mean, it's just crazy right now. It's like assassination after assassination after assassination. There's tribute being paid now. The wealth is really increasing. The land is shrinking down. I mean, everything God said is coming to fruition. It's everything we study in the prophets. This is what's happening, exactly the way God said it was going to happen through the prophets. That's the way it's happening. So he reigned 20 years, so he did rule longer than some of the recent ones, all the way back to Jeroboam II. It's the longest reign since then. But, he got it by killing off the previous king, by assassinating him, continues in idolatry. And then you got this. We already introduced Tiglath-Pileser again a few slides back. Now you got him taking several cities around Galilee and all of Naphtali. I believe this is called his second Western campaign. He's already coming in and started pressing on them. Now he's really kind of getting the northern kingdom kind of more being closer to Samaria and stuff, and their surrounding stuff. It's like falling by the wayside. It's being taken by force. So I don't have a good map of all those cities around there, but you did hear it mention Galilee, and you can go look at some of these, but really kind of all around the area up there in Galilee and the area of the tribe of Naphtali and stuff, all that's being stripped away from the northern kingdom. So again, these consequences are getting worse. And just this is a map, the tan part there, this Assyrian empire is just growing and growing and growing, and eventually it's going to, be all over this area right here that they're controlling right here. And it's kind of crazy because remember, we had that 60-year time when they were weaker and the borders were expanding. Well, now they're wiping everything out. Okay, we already talked about Uzziah's death, so let's move on quickly to Isaiah real quick. We can jump over to Isaiah 6, and this is what you're spending the whole next week on, so it's okay. Johnny and Rob will take care of this mostly in the next week, but let's quickly at least see if we can get through the first 7 verses of Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, that gives us a timeline, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. 2 covered his face, 2 covered his feet, and 2 he was used to fly. And one cried out to the other, saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So I said, so this is Isaiah, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King and the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is purged. So see kind of where the timeline is. That's not that important, but now we're going to be getting into Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah's time as we're ending Uzziah here. But Isaiah is allowed to view the throne scene, which we just read there. You got the seraphim above the throne of God, and how do they react? With reverence. How does God respond to Isaiah's fear? You can see the great fear. I have unclean lips, and he's like, I'm going to be killed for what I'm seeing here. But God shows love and mercy. And the important part we can get for you to remember this, because it's kind of strange we're jumping in chapter 6 here. The introduction is in chapter 6, really, of him being called as a prophet. He says, Here am I, send me. And we can get a strong lesson from that one right there. The boldness of Isaiah right there to be like, I may have been unclean lips and this right here, but God has purified me. Send me. I'll go do what you want right here. And this is going to be mostly for the kingdom of Judah now, this prophecy of Isaiah here. But, he boldly says, Here am I, send me. So we'll just finish up real quick without reading it. Hopefully you had a chance to read this at home. Pretty much what he's told to keep on preaching regardless of how the people respond, because God knows the people are going to reject him. And he's like, how long will I do this? And God pretty much says, you're going to do it until the place is wiped out, till the captives are taken, to the land's desolate. So desolation and destruction, again, pointing back to what's been talked about before, is about to come. And now it's about to come on Judah. as well. That's going to be coming soon. And then it just ends with a hope for the remnant. You notice in all these prophecies and stuff we talked about, they're evil and they're not acting right, but God always gives hope for the remnant. So there's always hope for those that even though there's consequences on the nation, this remnant, if they will turn to God, God will give them salvation. That's all I have for today. Appreciate everybody's participation. Again, got the whole book of Isaiah in the next two classes. Johnny Wednesday and Rob will take care of the latter half of it next Sunday. Thank you.